Okay, so our last simple sentence modifier we're taking a look at is well, I guess there's two. Sorry, everybody. The last two we're going to take a look at. The first one is what we call the vocative. So a vocative is basically a form of address. So whenever you're addressing someone in your sentences, we call that a vocative. It comes from the root of voc, V-O-C, which means to call. It's how we get words like your vocation, which is your calling in life, which is your job, or your avocation, which is your hobby. Or if you go to church, sometimes you have a hymn of invocation, which in which you're calling your God to listen to your church service, really. And so a vocative basically is a calling to someone. So you're addressing someone. And so those are simple sentence modifiers. So if I say, ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. The reason you put a comma after ladies and gentlemen is because it's a simple sentence modifier. You may not have known that before, but that's the reason why. Or if you said, tell us again, Mr. Doherty, how you swam with a baby dolphin on your back in order to return it to its mother. When you address Mr. Doherty, regardless of whether it's the beginning, the end, or the middle of the sentence, you're always going to place commas around your vocatives because they're not really part of the sentence. They are simple sentence modifiers. The second thing we have is what we call the interjection. Now, in traditional Latin grammar, we would call this one of the 8 parts of speech. We don't look at it as a part of speech because we look at both form and structure classes, and it doesn't really have add a form to the sentence, and it doesn't really form any kind of structure. It doesn't really glue anything or help mold any parts of the sentence together. It is simply a word that's completely independent from the sentence. It's almost like an expletive in the sense that it's not really part of the sentence at all, but it doesn't serve any purpose at all. And oftentimes it just simply shows some emotion. And so sometimes you'll see it set off with a comma. Sometimes it's even set off with an exclamation mark as if it were its own sentence. It is a useless thing, this interjection, but we use them all the time. So if I say, good grief, don't confuse me any more than I already am. Good grief is an interjection. We would float it because it's not really part of anything. Or even words like yes and no. Yes, I will have seconds on that scrapple casserole, Grandma. Well, Grandma's a vocative, but yes is an interjection. And therefore, that's why it takes a comma or commas if it was in the middle of the sentence. So if we add this to our original sentence about Mr. Doherty, if I said, wow, tell us again, Mr. Doherty, how you swam with a baby dolphin on your back in order to return it to its mother. Mr. Doherty is going to float, and so is the word wow. We're going to have two individual simple sentence modifiers. We diagram this one. I know you're salivating. Let's do this thing. Let me change my screen. Let's bring it on down to where is it? He's right here. All right, bringing it on. I'm just going to go ahead and do them. So I know the word wow is a simple sentence modifier. I'm going to do him in the traditional pine green color. So wow is going to float up here. And Mr. Doherty, you are also going to float because you are also a simple sentence modifier in the form of a vocative. So Mr. Doherty is also going to do. I'm not even spelling anything right. Come on, you. All right, here we go again. Sorry, Doherty is also going to float. This is your interjection. This is your simple. This is your vocative. Now our sentence down here says, "Tell us how you swam." So this whole thing sitting here, how you swam with baby dolphin on your back in order to return it to its mother. That highlighter is the worst. It is too large to do any good. That's why I look at it. It's the size of a small iguana. Why would I ever have something that big? That's why, Jeffrey. All right, so can you see that this thing right here, I'm not sure what a small quantity is or it looks like, but this whole thing is a noun clause. So therefore, what I really have is I have a direct object in that noun clause. I'm telling to us, indirect object, this whole thing, direct object. You follow me, all right? So I'm going to build this one somewhat in the middle because I'm going to need some space above, some space below, I think. So I'm going to have the verb tell, and you're telling when again. Did you see how I did that? A little adverb telling when again, and you're telling to us. Here's your indirect object, which is us. If you want to put a little X here, you certainly can. You don't have to. And you're telling direct object what? Up on a tree. Noun clause. Here it comes. Start with my verb, which is swam, and here's my subject, you. So here's you swam, and you swam how? All right, so that interrogative sits underneath there. How is an adverb, and then you swam with dolphin, a dolphin, but it's also baby dolphin. Let's flatten that word, baby. And you swam, not on, you didn't swim on your back, but it's a dolphin on your back. So let's build off dolphin off. It's dolphin on back. Did you see what I did there? I didn't want to say I swam. You swam on your back because he didn't swim on his back. If the dolphin's on his back, so on your back, and then in order to, we know an in order to is always going to be underneath the verb. So I'm going to extend this line so I have some room. Here's my adverbial infinitive. In order to. In order to what? Return direct object, it. And you're returning where? To mother. Its mother. Now, the one thing I did not put in here yet is the subject of the actual sentence, which is sitting way at the very beginning. Am, I'm going to change my color just to be real, I don't know, draw attention to it. So some people will always say, well, why don't you put Mr. Doherty there? Aren't you saying Mr. Doherty, tell us? You're like, you're right, it is. Mr. Doherty is truly the subject, or it wants to be the subject, but that wouldn't make any sense because Mr. Doherty does not agree with the verb tell. It would say Mr. Doherty tells us, but what you're really doing is you're making something which is imperative. We know an imperative sentence does not necessarily mean that you have an implied subject. It basically means the verb is not being conjugated. And that's why Mr. Doherty is not your subject of the sentence. He is a vocative, and the actual subject is the word you. It's just understood. So it's just like that. All right. So Mr. Doherty is still sitting up here as our vocative. Here's wow, which is our interjection, if I could just spell it. And then here's our rest of our sentence. And that's our final simple sentence modifier. Hope you enjoyed the show.